Hello and welcome to Stampin' with Jennifer Helm. I am Jennifer Helm, an independent demonstrator with Stampin' Up! Tonight I have for you a Tealight easel card. This is something a little different. It's not your standard greeting card. Will not fit in a regular envelope because this card is a 3-panel card that sets up like an easel. And you've probably seen me do easel cards, but the trick with this one is the front of the card is created out of vellum, which is it's kind of like a clear frosted paper if you're not familiar with vellum. And then you can take an electric tea light or a little electric votive like this one and put it in the card, and then it lights up your card from the inside. I'll turn out the lights later on so you can see what it looks like. But this is very super simple to make, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing you are going to need is a piece of cardstock that is 12 inches long by 4 1/4 inches wide. This is gray granite that I'm going to be using for this card. And this is super simple. We're going to score this in 2 places to create the 3 panels. So you're going to score it at 4 inches and 8 inches on the 12-inch side. And so to keep this easy on my end, I'm going to take my paper trimmer and the scoring blade and just score it 4 inches from either end. So that's 4 inches and 8 inches, and that's all I need to do to get this card ready to go. Next step, I like to flip it over so I'm folding down on the valley side of the score lines, if that makes sense. And then I like to burnish them with my burn folder. It just helps kind of keep the card together. So I've got it folded together. This is going to be the front of my card here. So I'm going to take a piece of designer series paper. This is 3 3/4 inches tall by 4 inches wide. If you're using a make sure that you have it going in the right direction. So remember, your card's going to be standing up. My paper is plaid, so it doesn't really matter. And this is a piece of matching gray granite designer series paper. So I'm going kind of tone on tone here tonight. So the next thing I'm going to do is take my adhesive. This is my Stampin' Seal Plus, my favorite adhesive that we have. And I'm going to go ahead and glue this to the front of the card. I'm keeping this kind of simple. You can get as complicated as you want with designs for this card, but I wanted to keep it simple. So here's my card, and we're ready to create the frame on the front of the card. Now, if you're just starting out, I recommend using something simple to get you started, and then you can kind of branch out from there. I'm using one of the largest scalloped squares from our Layering Squares die set. It's a great staple to have in your collection if you have a die cut machine, because who doesn't need squares? And we have graduated sizes of the scallop squares and plain squares as well, and they're interchangeable. You can use them together. So what we're going to do is cut a frame out of the front of the card. So bear with me 1 second. I got to grab my die cut machine. This is our die cut and emboss machine. It is the larger one that we have, not the mini. This is the full size, and it's a little tricky for me to get on camera, but we'll make it work. So I love that the machine tells me what I need. We call it making a sandwich when we are putting this together, but Stampin' Up! Has made it really easy and given us numbers, so we just follow the recipe basically. So I'm using a thin die, so for this one I need the thicker platform number 1. Then I need the thin platform number 2. And then first up, my cutting plate, and I try to keep up, and that way I don't have any random lines that might accidentally pop up on my die cuts. Now, since this panel is long, what I'm going to do is unfold it, because I only want to cut through this layer. I don't want to cut through the whole thing. And my square is going to go on this front piece with the designer series paper. So I'm going to feed this through the machine a little bit One big tip that I have for you if you're not familiar with die cutting machines, it is best when you use it not to have a die with a straight edge go in the machine parallel. It's hard on the machine and the rollers, it's hard on your dies, and it's going to creak and crack and make lots of noise and make you really nervous. So I recommend if you're using something with a straight edge like this, just offset it a little bit so it kind of goes through more of it at an angle. So if you can make that work, it will be easier on you and the machine. So I'm going to line this up, making sure you can see what I'm doing here. Now, if you're worried about your die moving around on the paper, just take a little Post-it note. You can try washi tape. I'm going to be honest, for me, washi tape doesn't tend to agree with my paper. Sometimes I've tried it and I've ripped my designer series paper and then I'm irritated. So I would take a Post-it note and just kind of tack down the die, and it's not going to hurt anything. It'll just keep it in place while you roll it through the machine. So I think this looks pretty good. We'll see if it stays there, because what I need to do to finish my sandwich is just to put one more of these clear plates on. This is the one I use as my top plate. And I think I've got those. Nope. I think I accidentally used my top plate once for my bottom plate, but that's okay. Not the end of the world. All right, and okay. I think I'm going to call that good, and then I'm just going to roll this through the machine. And I had a little square, that's why it's giving me a little trouble, but it's okay. There we go. Put my machine out of the way, and now when I take it apart and move my cutting plates, I have the square that I cut out to create the frame. So this piece I'm going to save and use on another project because that is just too cute to throw away. So I'll create something with that later. And we will move along and create the vellum piece that's going to be the frosted piece on the front of the card that we'll see the image through. So I have a piece of vellum. That's our clear frosted paper. This is the same size as my designer series paper, so it's 3 3/4 inches tall by 4 inches wide. And I always double check before I stamp on it that I've got it the right way, because if you have it the other way, it'll be a little too tall and a little short on the sides. So make sure you have it oriented correctly. And I'm actually going to, I don't need this for stamping tonight because the stamp I'm using is red rubber, but this just is going to help you see it a little better on my work table. So there's my vellum, and I'm going to stamp in black Memento ink at the moment when I put my cabin on the front of the card. So normally I take, but this, I have good coverage with my ink, so I'm going to bring the ink pad to the stamp and just make sure I've got good coverage here with the ink. Kind of looks like I don't in places, but it's just the way the stamp is made. Now, one thing to keep in mind about vellum is it does not dry quickly. If I was to stamp this on paper, it would be dry in a snap. But because of the shininess of the vellum, it's not as waxy as wax paper, but if you're not familiar with it, it's the best way I can describe it. It does not dry instantaneously. So what I recommend, once I get this stamped on here, I'm going to stamp in the middle because I know it's going to fill up most of my frame. And I'm just going to hold it down for a second. And there's my pretty little cabin. Now, I could hit this with a heat tool. And I did that on my sample that I made last night, and it did help, but the ink still wanted to be a little bit damp. So what I'm going to do is just set this to the side, and then I stamped an extra last night, hit it with the heat tool, and let it dry overnight. And we're going to use that one right now to finish the project. And then I'll create another card later with the image that's drying currently. So this next, I'm going to close my Memento ink before I stick something in it. So this panel is nice and dry, and it's going to go on the card like so. Now, depending on what kind of image you use and how big your frame is, you might want to trim your vellum down. It doesn't necessarily have to be a piece this big. This just works well for what I was doing. So you want to make sure you're putting your glue on the right side of the vellum. It's going to be on the side where you stamped your image because we're kind of gluing it upside down. So just keep that in mind. And if you're using vellum on a regular project, it would show through, like glue dots will show through, so sometimes you have to work out where you position them. I'm going to use my stamp and seal, and I'm going to double check here. I'm going to put glue down the sides and probably a little on the top, maybe a little along the bottom. You do have to watch your placement on your glue. So I'm using my silicone mat, and let's see, whoop. With my Stamp and Seal Plus, I've got these beautiful little segmented pieces, and I'm going to fold them back onto the vellum. I'm going to talk a little bit about gluing and things here in just a minute, but all right, so there we go. Let's see, I think I'm going to run a little bit at the bottom too. You want to have your vellum attached so it doesn't sag, because that would just not quite have the same effect. And make sure you're gluing that in the right direction. Almost glued my cabin on upside down. All right, so when you are ready, just go ahead and place your vellum piece on the card. Now, if you're a little particular, not necessarily OCD, you might not like that your glue shows through, or I'm going to show you another example later. Sometimes to position the stamped image correctly, your vellum is a little cockeyed. If that's the case, you might have to do some trimming, and it's not going to be straight. If that bothers you, all you have to do is create a frame. You could use that same die if you wanted and create a panel that you could glue over top. You'll just have to make sure your squares line up so it doesn't take away from your image on the outside. But if you're okay with it, just leave it like this. But there we have our pretty little cabin. Now to finish this card, we're just going to do a little bit of stamping. And this piece of Whisper White it's not Whisper White, it's Basic White, is 3 3/4 inches tall and 4 inches wide. So same as the DSP, same as the vellum. And for this, I'm going to take some gray granite ink and a few other images from the Peaceful Cabin set, which is the stamp set I'm using. I don't think I mentioned that, although you probably gathered that from the cabin. So first thing I'm going to do is take this little snowflake swirl. These are some of my favorite stamps. And I didn't like all the blank space on this panel, so I'm just taking this little stamp and adding some accent to the top. Nothing fancy, just like that. And then I'm going to take my sentiment, I'm going to put it here at the bottom. So when I create my easel effect, this is going to show at the bottom. So just like that. The next step is to glue this panel into the card. So your middle panel here is going to be blank because that's the back half of the easel. This is the panel we're going to glue our sentiment and easel base on. So all I need to do is line this up with a little border around the edge. And basically, I have one step left to do to create my easel, and that's to give it something to prop up on. Now, if you prefer, you don't have to stamp directly on this piece of Basic White. You could take like a long skinny rectangle or some other shape, stamp a sentiment or a design there, and attach it with dimensionals here to give you a little height, and that would be your easel stop. For this, I've decided to use some embellishments, and I want to give you a tip, because when I first did my sample, my embellishments that I added were a little bit crooked, so my easel wants to sit a little bit crooked, and that kind of annoys me. So I thought to myself, how could I fix that? And you can take a ruler, or I'm going to take my bone folder, and just figure out where I want my easel to set up, because I'm going to add some embellishments to this panel. And I think since these are more of a basic gray, I'm actually going to go with the white ones. These are classic matte dots, which will be available in our new January to June mini catalog. If you do not have a demonstrator you are currently working with and you would like a paper catalog in your hands, which is my personal favorite, go ahead and message me either in the comments here or hop over to my website and contact me through there. You can also find me on Facebook at The Faithful Stamper. Just let me know you'd like a catalog and I'll get in touch and we'll see about getting that to you. You can also check out the website as well. But I'm going to take the largest of these little dots and I'm going to put one, as I said, I want to try to keep this straight, on this corner. You can use as many as you like. You can use 2, you could use 3, up to you. Let's see. Yep, I think that's close. And then before I attempt to prop up my easel, I like to re-crease my folds because sometimes that just helps. Sometimes you have to tweak it a little bit, like this one wants to be ornery. There we go. So my easel's standing up, and I apologize because this does not show the best on camera. Oop. There's a side view. And then, of course, whoop, left my tea light on there, with a little glow, and I promised I would turn the lights out. So I know the lighting's a little bit off, but if you turn the lights all the way off, hold on one second. This gives you a really nice idea, if I can hold it up right, of how the candle lights up that vellum. So just fun. A fun little different kind of card. And as I said, you can't mail this in a regular envelope, obviously, because you have a candle. But you could take this card and one of the little electric tea lights and wrap them in a bubble mailer, and send them that way. A little bit more postage, but definitely a wow card that someone would love to get. So I do have a couple other samples to show you. For these next 2 samples, I used a different shape, obviously not a square. This is one of our cloche dies, which is retiring, as well as the 2 stamp sets that coordinate with it. If you do not like that the vellum stays wet with the ink and you don't want to leave it sit overnight, an easy out for that is heat embossing. So I used Versamark ink to stamp my image. I hit it with embossing powder and heat set it with my heat tool. So I don't know if you can see the nice shiny birds, and there is texture here. And so it's just a different look, and once I hit it with the heat tool, it was good to go. I didn't have to worry about it smearing or anything like that. And so here's the inside of this card. I did use a Designer Series paper strip here. And I added some bling on the outside to match the gems that I used to prop my easel up on the card. And this is a card just in different paper, different gems. And I did the inside a little bit differently. I used my Designer Series paper strip at the top. And here's one, if you're a little OCD, like this is gonna bother me, so it's gonna need to have a frame, because that vellum's, to position it correctly in the bell shape, I had to put the vellum on, I had to trim the vellum a little bit, and now it's crooked, so I don't want somebody seeing that. So I'll just make a little frame for it, and then it'll be good to go. Now you can also have some fun with heat embossing in a different manner. And these next 2 cards, I used a brand new stamp set that is coming out in January. This is called Sweet Conversations. And I'm holding this paper in because I want you to see, can you see the color here on the vellum? What I did was I stamped these images in Versamark, added white embossing powder, and I heat set it. And then, before I attached it to the card, I took fingertip sponge daubers and different colors of ink that coordinate with the cute little Designer Series paper on the outside, and I just sponged some color on. So this doesn't come across on camera really well, I'm afraid, but that's why I wanted to show you holding the white paper up behind it. It's a fun little tie-dye look, and it just gives the card a different dimension. I also, on this one, added a framed element to the front of the card. And then It stands up, and it could be a showpiece because it says Happy Valentine's Day on the front. I have room to write my message up here at the top, but it could set out and be a happy little decoration for someone. And then here is another version. This one, I think the color is a little bit lighter. I went a little bit darker on the initial card. And then I won't turn off all the lights, but I'll show you really quick just how much fun this is to have the card with a little pop of color. All right, so I hope you enjoyed learning how to make the Tealight easel card. It's just something a little bit different, a little bit fun if you want to surprise someone with a card and let them know that you're thinking about them. So I hope you enjoyed learning how to make the card. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. And if you haven't already, I'd love it if you would subscribe to this YouTube channel. I typically post videos here twice a week with different techniques. And you can also follow me over on Facebook as The Faithful Stamper, and I post different projects there as well. Take care, everyone. Thanks for watching. Happy crafting.